I'm happy to introduce to you Neil McDonough. That sounds very Irish. He is in fact Irish, but he is now in Belgium, and he is the director of the Marine Board. Now, that sounds a little bit different than a scientist in a scientific institute. Neil is busy not with the science per se, but with the management of science to make it possible. And so he started off, of course, as a marine biologist. He did his PhD in Queen's University in Belfast. But thereafter, first he stayed in Ireland, sort of, first in Galway at the National University of Ireland, thereafter in Belfast in Queen's University, which I think is also more or less Ireland.
Yes.
Yes, there we go.
We'll call it Ireland.
And then he went back to Galway in the Marine Institute. And what he was doing there is mostly management of science, so the organization of it. And services, innovation, research, technological development and innovation, which is a lot more than just pure science alone. That gives you an extremely broad view of what is important in marine biology. And so he became, then the next step was to become the director of the Marine Board in Belgium. Now, the Marine Board, you're going to explain what the Marine Board is. It is, in very short, one of these organizations that takes care that in Brussels, for instance, marine sciences are also high on the agenda and not only astrophysics and elementary particles and that kind of stuff. So today we have him here, and yeah, I think the student meeting was already very exciting, and I look forward to an exciting meeting on navigating the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viva, for your very kind introduction, and also, of course, for the invitation to come to the beautiful Stazione Zoologica. It's my first time here. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here, to visit and to see a little bit of the station and meet with some of the researchers. So thank you for that. So as Viva said, this will not be a scientific presentation, so it's a little bit different, I suppose, from your normal seminars. It will be very much in the science policy domain, marine science policy specifically, of course. So I've called it Navigating the Future, a look at the marine science policy process in Europe. A good deal of it, for the first, say, half, I'll really focus on the European Marine Board, on what the work we're doing and some of the papers we've published and some of the impacts that we've had on the science policy process. And then I'll move to discuss more generally some of the developments in science policy, some of the things that are happening effectively in the landscape, some of the other players in the landscape, some of the way things work, and how we influence the policy agenda. As Viva said, it is something, I find, moving around Europe and visiting research centers and institutions, there's a varying level of awareness, let's say, of the kind of work we're doing in Marine Board in that sort of science policy interface. Some people do understand this kind of work and what the importance, let's say, of advocating for funding for marine science and for identifying, the most important priorities for future research funding, whereas others really have no involvement in that area and are focused fully on their science, which is perfectly understandable. But the reality is we do need this kind of mechanisms. We do need these mechanisms, the Marine Board is one of them, to influence the agenda and to ensure that our research, that marine science research, is well supported, has proper investment, and we still argue that it is underinvested generally. If you compare, for example, to something like space research, that there is still some way to go, but also that the funds are targeted in the right place. Okay, so this is an outline of my presentation. I'll give an overview of the European Marine Board, just to give you some background as to who we are and what we do. I'll go through some recent activities and publications, so focusing on some of the thematic areas that we've been involved in developing policy advice, with a particular focus on our Navigating the Future series, which is where I take the title from the presentation. I'll say more about that later. And then, as I said, some general perspectives on European maritime policy and European science policy, and then with some concluding remarks. So, the European Marine Board, what is the EMB? We are a partnership of member organizations, and we have 33 members from 19 countries. Our members are of three kinds. Our members are either major national marine research institutes or oceanographic research institutes, funding agencies, which is quite unusual. We have a number of members who are funding agencies that fund marine science. And then the third category is national networks or consortiums of universities that are very active in marine research. And this third category is quite interesting. It's a growing category. So just to give you an example, here in Italy, the members are OGS in Trieste, we have CNR, and we have CONISMA. And as I was speaking with Adriana earlier, and also the students, we have, very unfortunately, a cap of 3 members per country. The reason for that is it was felt important in our statutes not to have too strong a voice from one individual countries. So if we didn't have the cap, you might have 6 members from a certain country, but still only 1 from another, and that makes it a little bit lopsided in terms of the influence that a certain country will have. That's the rationale for the 3 members, but in Italy's case, it came back to haunt us because we couldn't take Stazione Zoologica as a member, and that's still something we feel a little bit sore about and hope that it can be rectified in the future. But that's back on our agenda, that cap. So, as I said, a unique partnership of mixed member organizations. Just to mention the national networks of universities. So CONISMA, of course, is this network, it's a very large network in Italy of universities. I think it's 31 universities that are very active in marine research. But CONISMA is actually quite a forerunner in this area. A number of other countries, this is just happening in a number of other countries. About four years ago, France, for the first time, established a network of universities called Marine Universities of France. And they did that ostensibly to join Marine Board. But in fact, it's become a very strong collaboration in itself. And now there's a very strong French consortium. Norway have just established a consortium. Ireland has established a consortium. We have a consortium in Scotland, not the whole of the UK, just Scotland, called MASTS, Marine Alliance for Science and Technology Scotland. So what's happening there is this is bringing in largely the academic voice. So we have marine institutes very well represented, but probably the academic communities, the university-based marine researchers have been less well represented. And if we have this structural development in many European countries where these universities are forming consortiums or networks and then using those as a channel to influence European policy. I'll come back to that. So that's our membership base. And you can see the spread, quite a strong spread across Europe. In terms of geographically speaking, the limit is not the EU by any means. We're not restricted to EU. It's the Council of Europe. So our members are institutions or organizations from anywhere within the 47 Council of Europe countries. And we do have criteria for members, of course, but geographically, that's the range. Our structure, our chair is Professor Jan Mees, who is director of the Flanders Marine Institute in Belgium, or VLIS. It's also the case that we are based in Ostend, as I'll show you on the next slide, and have we're actually neighbours with our current chair, which is very useful from a practical perspective. But the chair, of course, rotates every 3 to 5 years. The board itself, as I said, has 33 member organisations. The board meets twice a year, once in spring and once in autumn, and a delegate from each member organisation represents that organisation on the board. So we have these large board meetings twice a year. Then we have an executive committee made up of 8 members, the chair, 6 vice chairs, and myself as an ex officio member, and we will meet approximately 3 times a year. And the executive committee really does more work in terms of preparing for the decision making of the board and making recommendations to the board in terms of activities and strategies for marine board work. And then finally, we have the third level of governance, the secretariat, which is the 5 staff based in Ostend. So this is our location. Ostend is on the coast of Belgium. Just to note, originally the European Marine Board, I didn't include any slides on this, was part of the European Science Foundation, which is based in Strasbourg in France. We moved from there 10 years ago and took up an offer from the Flemish government to be located in a more maritime location. Also in a cluster. This is called the Innovocean site, and it contains not only the Flanders Marine Institute, it also contains the International Oceanographic Data Exchange Office of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. It contains the Secretariat for the European Marine Observation and Data Network, which is a European Commission-funded initiative, and of course our own offices. And that's a hosting arrangement with Flanders. Also, we have recently separated from the European Science Foundation, which has gone its own way. So we now are a fully independent legal entity. That's a new development for us. We've established ourselves as an international not-for-profit association under Belgian law. So our mission is to provide a pan-European platform for our member organizations to develop common priorities, to advance marine research, and to bridge the gap between science and policy in order to meet future marine science challenges. And to be honest, I think this mission needs to be updated a little bit, probably completely, but certainly I would insert the word "and societal challenges," because it's also, our role is looking at broader societal challenges, whether it's climate change, food security, energy, human health, and looking at the marine science needs and capacities and priorities needed to address those. So this is a sort of graphic which tries to demonstrate what we do. On the left, we have basically what Marine Board is a science strategy and foresight mechanism, or what we call a science policy interface. So we conduct horizon scanning, we identify as a board emerging issues, we identify and put forward research priorities, we form expert working groups. Well, in fact, the expert working groups identify the research priorities, and obviously also identifying new opportunities. We then provide advice in the form of mostly publications. So we publish science policy documents, and I brought a range of these here for you to show. I'll run through them in a slide anyway. But it's just to show we have a whole range from deep sea research. These shorter documents. These are just short policy briefs. And that's submerged cultural heritage, decommissioning of oil and gas structures, the overemphasis on short-term policy making and climate change, marine biodiversity, citizen science, and so on. And so from very short documents, these are called future science briefs. They're, let's say, medium-length documents, about 40, 50 pages, to position papers, which can be 100 pages or more. So a range of different kinds of documents, which you see at the top, vision documents, statements, policy briefs. But we also organize conferences and events, and we just talk directly, of course, to policymakers. We target, who are we speaking to? Well, the European institutions are very important for us, the EU institutions, I mean, the European Commission, European Parliament. But also, we're not just about influencing European science policy at EU level. It's also at national level, because the vast majority of research investment is made actually at national level. Probably somewhere around 80 to 85% of the research investment, science investment across the board, not just in marine now, across the board, is made at national level, and only maybe 10 to 15% at European level. So it's very important that our voice is heard at national level. We're influencing national strategies and funding programs also. Of course, we're also speaking to the scientific community and even the general public. And we're impacting on the European research area. I'll come back to that a little later. Research programming, so the calls that are appearing, for example, in Horizon 2020 program and in national funding programs. Research investments, same thing. The organization and better coordination of marine research capacities and infrastructures, and of course seas and oceans management generally. So just to fly through some more visual slides in terms of some of the ways we operate. So I've mentioned our plenary meetings. We meet as a board, a full board twice a year in plenary. We also convene working groups to address particular topics that we have chosen for further to publish a document in, for example. So that's a working group. We conduct science policy forums. These are events we hold in Brussels where we bring the scientific communities together with policymakers and stakeholders, where we try to drive forward the agenda on a particular topic. It could be Arctic research, blue technologies. Our next one is on international ocean governance, ocean observing, etc. And we hold European Parliament events. So we really go right into the heart of the Brussels institutions to try and transfer our messages to policymakers within the European Parliament, but also they're attended by a wide range of people. And even direct engagement with policymakers. This is Commissioner Vella visiting our stand at European Maritime Day, and we're discussing some of the publications we have with him. But we've actually had quite a lot of interactions with Commissioner Vella. He is the commissioner, the EU Commissioner for Environment, Maritime Affairs and Fisheries. So he's a very good commissioner and very engaged and active. So we've had a very good relationship with him. Finally, just to mention our Euro-Ocean conferences. These are, so I would say we've two flagship activities. So a lot of things we do, we publish documents on a lot of different topics, but I would call two of them probably flagship activities, at least two anyway. One of them is our Euro-Ocean conference series. These are major European marine science policy conferences that are held about every 4 to 5 years. So they're not that regular, but they're very high on the agenda. We generally work with a country that is hosting the presidency of the European Council, so that is the EU presidency at that time. So the last one, this is a picture of the last one, which was in Rome, and we had our Euro-Ocean conference in Rome in 2014 during the Italian presidency. So you can see it's quite a large conference. We might get 300 to 400 people at the Euro-Ocean conferences. Very, political. So we'll start out with sort of getting high-level policymakers and politicians. We had some government ministers from the Italian cabinet, but we had some EU commissioners, director generals of various DGs in the Commission. And then, of course, we have more thematic-focused sessions with leading scientists presenting, the big challenges in their research fields. So those conferences, we usually have an output, and they are declarations. So these are the last 4 declarations. The first declaration was issued by the Galway Euro-Ocean Conference in 2004, Aberdeen in 2007, Ostend in 2010, and then the last one, Rome, the Rome Declaration in 2014. So that's been the sort of evolution, if you like, of the Euro-Ocean Conference series. We are looking now at the next one. We're looking at 2 options, either to have it with the Romanian presidency in spring of 2019, or to, if the Romanian presidency cannot take us on and as part of their presidency calendar, we're talking to them at the moment, then we'll just have a separate one, standalone one in Brussels, but that will be in spring 2019. So that's one of our flagship activities. Purpose of this slide is just to say we are the only, as you'll see from later slides, there's quite a lot of marine science networks in Europe and internationally. It's quite a crowded landscape. We identify certain things about Marine Board which are unique. One of those is that we're the only one in European Science Network that covers the whole spectrum of marine science. You will get others focused on fisheries and aquaculture, or ocean observing, or research infrastructures, and so on. But we are covering the whole spectrum, which is a challenge in itself, because marine science is a huge domain. So that's all this word cloud is showing. It's just saying, we're basically engaged in and interested in all aspects of marine science. And one of the most important mechanisms that we use is our working group process. So this is a very simple graphic just showing the process. On the left, our board members will identify a topic of European or global dimension which is lacking visibility or integration or coordinated approach in Europe, that needs a sort of strategic boost in terms of the science policy attention being paid to it, and that can be developed through the work of a Marine Board working group. The next stage, once that topic is agreed by the board and approved, is to put together a working group. So the board members choose the topics, and they're taking advice from their networks and themselves in doing that, but the decisions are reached by consensus. But then to actually do the work, that's done by an expert working group, which is basically the top people in that field, or it might be multidisciplinary, but we'll identify the disciplines we need and the expertise we need, and we'll ask our members to identify who are the best people in Europe that can form a working group of usually 10 to 12 people. And that working group then will be given a terms of reference and tasked to produce essentially normally a position paper over a period of 12 to 18 months. And it is that working group that really will, frame the major priorities for that particular topic in the position paper. But it's a rigorous process because it just doesn't stop with it. For a start, before we even publish the paper, the working group is working to fairly sort of fixed and a mechanism of foresight and strategic development of a paper. But then we will have an external peer review of that paper by 2 leading international experts before it's published. It also goes to our full membership, who have the chance to make final comments and so on. So it goes through this very, very rigorous sort of review process before it's finally published. And the point about that is it's really is a very strong, robust piece of science policy advice by the time it is published. And we would say that that is not anything that's done by other European networks. That's our added value, is producing these strategy documents. But we follow up then, of course, with a very active communication. So it doesn't stop just when we publish a document. We, as the Secretariat, the working group probably doesn't do too much more apart from maybe present it at a few conferences. Secretariat really follows up strongly. And we really target certain people to get that message across. I'm just going to run through some of our recent publications, going back to 2010, starting with one which Adriana was a member of the working group on marine biotechnology. So this was our position paper published in 2010, New Vision and Strategy for Europe, and just discussing with Adriana how we should be looking to refresh maybe some of these ideas in support of marine biotech in the future. Flying through some of these publications on position papers on climate change, on marine pollution, on marine biodiversity, marine microbial ecology and its role in ecosystem functioning and environmental change, marine protected areas, oceans and human health, I'll say a little bit more about, our flagship series Navigating the Future 4, or Navigating the Future, the last one being 4, Submerged Cultural Heritage. These are all full position papers. Deep sea research challenges. This isn't a position paper, this is a short, I'm just now giving some of the most recent publications, a short science commentary, we call it, on the ticking time bomb of climate change, really looking at the need to look at much longer time horizons in our policy discussions around climate change and the implications for the sort of sea level rise which is already locked in from the emissions that we have, that have been already made. So that's just to give you, a feeling of the breadth of topics that are addressed by Marine Board activities and papers. Just to look at 2 very recent ones that we've published in the last few weeks, essentially, or month or so. This is a position paper we've just published on citizen science. So it's a topic which our members felt was very interesting, but needed to have a kind of a strategic view in the sense that there was a growing number of marine citizen science initiatives and projects around Europe and a growing interest in engaging with citizens, bringing citizens into the scientific process, getting the support from citizens to collect data and information, but of course dealing with the challenges of that, the constraints of citizen science and data collected by citizens, and also the benefits of using that as a mechanism of stakeholder engagement and actually communicating science and marine issues to the general public. So that's a position paper. All of these papers are available on our website to download at marineboard.eu. We launched that in European Maritime Day in the UK just about a month ago, a little over a month ago. Another one we've published is a policy brief, just also launched at Maritime Day. And this one, I'll have a couple of slides on this one. This is on decommissioning of offshore man-made installations, really looking at oil and gas installations. Now, probably the main focus of this came out of a program in the North Sea called Insight, but we're aware that this is not just a North Sea issue, it's something that's very important in the Mediterranean, for example, as well. And we sort of, although there's a sort of slight North Sea focus, we've expanded it from the Insight focus to a more general issue. So really what we're looking at is the reality that if we go back to the North Sea, there are a huge number of oil and gas platforms and installations coming to the end of their functional life. And what do you do with them? What do you do with them in terms of decommissioning? Do you just, strip them out of there? It's with a huge environmental impact of that process. Do you just leave them there, or do you do something in between? We need some kind of scientific advice to understand what is the most effective mechanism of decommissioning these. So this is one of the Shell platforms that's going to be decommissioning. Underneath the legs of this are 300,000 tons of concrete on the seabed, which are anchoring this structure to the seabed. So clearly, to remove that would be an enormous impact in itself, never mind expense. In terms of expense, it's been estimated that, just on this side quickly, these are the oil and gas installations in the North Sea. So you can see how many there are from a map taken from the EMODnet Human Activities portal. The numbers are in the Northeast Atlantic, not just the North Sea, there are 1,357 oil and gas structures in the OSPAR maritime area. And the total estimated cost of full decommissioning of those structures in the North Sea has been estimated between 70 and 82 billion US dollars. And most of that would be funded by the taxpayer because through tax reliefs that the oil and gas companies get on decommissioning. So a program was set up in the North Sea called InSight. It's actually an interesting model in itself because it's funded by the oil and gas companies, but they have no control over the scientific choices that are made in terms of the calls or the selection of projects. And some of the key questions arising from that are the extent to which the human intervention in these structures themselves have added a new layer of diversity in the North Sea system. Do they, for example, represent a large interconnected substrate in their own right? And what would be the impact of partial or complete removal of these structures? And then leading into the sort of more management discussions and decisions that need to be made. So really this document is saying scientific research is crucial to support evidence-based decision-making around this whole topic. But this isn't just about the North Sea, this is all over the world. So for example, in the Gulf of Mexico, they have what's called a Rigs to Reefs program, where the government sponsor a program to support oil and gas companies to decommission their structures in particular locations, and then the government takes liability and responsibility for that. And they form artificial reefs. Okay, what's coming up down the line? We have a publication on training, MSc and PhD training, training in marine sciences. It's called Training the 21st Century Marine Professional. We have a policy brief on marine biotechnology in the pipeline. We had a kickoff meeting yesterday in Pisa of a new working group on biological observing in the ocean. We have an activity on advanced ecosystem modeling. We're participating in a joint activity on exoceans, the study of outer solar system icy moon oceans, which is quite an interesting topic. We've been invited to participate in this by the European Space Science Committee. And on the 6th of December, we'll have our forum on international ocean governance, particularly focusing on the UN SDGs. I think I'm going to skip past these slides because I'll very briefly say, I was going to use these to give an example of the kind of impact we have. So one of the things we do is when we publish a paper, as I said earlier, the activity doesn't stop. We monitor the impact of that paper, that it has on research programs, topics and calls, national strategies, etc., over a 2-year period after publication. And then we report that back to our members because they need to know we're not just doing this for fun, we're doing this for a reason. We're trying to have an impact on the agenda. So to look at one example, this was our Oceans and Human Health paper, which I could give a whole presentation in itself on the paper, but there isn't time for that today. Just to give you the few slides on the impact that the paper has had. So we published the paper, I think it was towards the end of 2013. We had a follow-up workshop in Cornwall, which was led by Professor Laura Fleming of the European Centre for Environment and Human Health in the University of Exeter. And she's been a really strong advocate for oceans and human health in Europe. We released a statement from that European workshop. This was the statement where we called for a unanimous call for coordinated and transnational interdisciplinary oceans and human health research program in Europe. And really it was a follow-up to the paper, so we just kept pushing the agenda with a statement. We also published a couple of papers from that. This is a paper in Marine Environmental Research on oceans and human health. And there was a special edition in the Journal of Marine the Marine Biological Association of the UK with a number of papers on that. Some of the impacts we've had, well, first of all, I don't know how many of you are familiar with an organization called JPI Oceans, that's the Joint Programming Initiative on Healthy and Productive Seas and Oceans. It's another Brussels-based marine science, let's say, platform or network, but it's not the science institutions and organizations like Marine Board, it's the ministries that fund science that come in under JPI Oceans. I'll show that in a later slide. But they have set out a strategic research agenda, and strategic area 4 is linking oceans, human health and well-being, and that's a direct result of our work with them on oceans and human health. So basically, we published the paper in 2013. We published then in early 2014 this statement. We had oceans and human health was a major priority area in the Rome Declaration, which I mentioned earlier. It appears then mid-2015 in the JPI Oceans Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. And finally, we get a new work program being released for the Horizon 2020 calls, 2016 and 2017, where there's a whole new pillar called Healthy People and Healthy Oceans, which has 3 topics in the oceans and human health zone. So that's the kind of follow-up impact we are working towards with the papers we publish, and that's just a little snapshot of one of those papers. I mentioned the Navigating the Future series. So this is one of our, Eurocean was one flagship. This is another of our flagships. So every 4 to 5 years, we'll publish a Navigating the Future. So this doesn't focus on one particular topic. It takes a higher level view of multiple topics, and it really says, you know, it's a sort of high level view of some of the major challenges for marine science in the next time period. Now, for Navigating the Future 4, we set a quite short time scale in 5 to 10 years. And we took a societal challenges approach to that. These are the chapters, for example. So there's some sort of generic introduction and cross-cutting issues at the end. But in the center, you have climate change, safe and sustainable use of marine space, food from the sea, oceans and health, energy and raw materials, use of deep sea resources, polar ocean science, blue technologies, etc. So each of these basically is a chapter in this document and can be read almost as a standalone policy document in its own right. So it's quite a hefty document, but you can just go in and read one of these chapters. So that's Navigating the Future 4. It was published in 2013. It's a series which, as I said, started in 2001. Number 4 was 2013. We launched it in Brussels with the then Commissioner for Research and Science and Innovation, Maura Geoghegan-Quinn, and Maria de Grata Carvalho was the European Parliament Rapporteur for the Horizon 2020 program. So that's the publication, the launch event. And looking ahead, Navigating the Future 5, the process is now underway for us to produce our next Navigating the Future. In Brussels on the 8th and 9th of November, we will have a horizon scanning workshop. And that we've already got the 20 people signed up for that workshop, experts who have been nominated by our membership, with a professional facilitator who will manage 2 days of foresight activities, and we'll pick the main topics that will be the focus of the next paper. Okay, conscious of time, so I'll move on. I just wanted to give some generic perspectives on the European maritime policy and European science policy process. So starting with the fact that, of course, Europe is a truly maritime continent, as everyone here will know. We're surrounded by 4 seas and 2 oceans. Our coastline is extensive, 89,000 kilometers if you include the EU plus Norway. 50% of our territory is underwater. In fact, we have the largest collectively exclusive economic zone in the world. France alone has the second largest because we have a lot of outermost regions, and there's very large, islands, for example, in the Pacific and so on, and Caribbean and the Atlantic that include very large exclusive economic zones. 43% of our population lives within 50 kilometers of the coastline, and most of our trade is seaborne. And according to the EU Blue Growth Strategy, the maritime economy in the EU accounts for some 5.4 million jobs and a gross value added of 500 billion euros per year. Okay, that's just a little bit of background as to why we have a strong basis for supporting marine science, and policy-relevant marine science is always something that the Commission is looking for. If we look at some of the policies and strategies that are relevant to marine science at European level, the number builds up very quickly, from the Integrated Maritime Policy, Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Common Fisheries Policy, the Blue Growth Strategy, Floods Directive, REACH Directive, and I'm not going to list them all. There is a huge number of policies which are either directly focused on protecting, conserving the marine environment, or indirectly focused on that. So it's a complex policy landscape. I'll show you this diagram. This was appeared in a paper by Sue Boys and Mike Elliott, the University of Hull, in 2014, where they looked at UK, EU, and international law and legislative instruments relevant to marine environment. And they called it their horrendogram, because it really is a very complex landscape. Nobody's going to read all of those, but they tried to at least lay it out in a diagram just to show how complex this sort of legislative sort of landscape is. Okay, so I just want to track back now and just mention an area which can sometimes cause some confusion. So I've been talking just now about really maritime policy, policies at whatever level, European level or national level, that are designed to either protect the maritime, or to protect our marine resources, or protect the marine environment, or to support, let's say, blue growth or maritime economic development, etc. That's in and around the maritime policy area. I think sometimes there can be some confusion when we talk about science policy, because we would say that we are a science policy interface in European Marine Board, but it's probably more appropriate if we divided this into two more clear categories: science for policy and policy for science. Science for policy is all aspects of science and research which is generating knowledge which can be used then to influence evidence-based policy making. Okay, so across a whole range of areas. So if we're looking for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive as a European Union policy instrument, there's a great need for science to inform how the MSFD is implemented. That comes in under the science for policy category. But then there's policy for science, and effectively a lot of the work we're doing in Marine Board is really is policy for science. So probably when we talk about science policy, we're talking about policy for science. Policy for science is all aspects of policy making that underpins how science is run, whether at European level, whatever level, national level. Funding, how science is funding, how it is organized, what are these sort of aspects, even including research ethics and gender balance and innovation and so on. Those are policies that underpin science itself. So there is a difference. There's some overlap between the two, and in terms of the work Marine Board does, we probably are largely a policy for science, marine science in this case, organization, but some of our advice moves into the science for policy. So when we do a position paper on marine protected areas, we're talking about the science needs for that topic, but we're also talking, it's unavoidable that we'll end up talking about some of the management needs as well. So I'm sort of trying to clear up maybe some slight terminology confusion that can arise. Just a slide on the European research area. This is a long-standing concept that the European Union supports, and really that's about breaking down the borders between European Union member states to make it easy for money and for people and for capacities to flow across borders so we can organize our research better and coordinate better at European level. And this is very much a science, a policy for science issue, is improving the way in which we can coordinate European research across borders. Why is it important in marine science and technology? It's particularly important because to break down our borders and to collaborate internationally, because accessing marine environments for research is difficult and costly. We rely on major research infrastructures very often, and these are not always accessible to all researchers. Plus, our marine seas are shared. The seas don't respect geopolitical borders, therefore we need common approaches to common marine challenges, and we need to address the sort of scientific issues collectively. The ocean and biological processes at sea have scales and interactions that require a joint approach, so we're dealing with big questions that need big science, basically. But we are traditionally quite well organized. We can do better, but we're quite well organized compared to some other communities. I would say that the European Marine Science networks are an increasingly crowded landscape. So I've described to you Marine Board. We are one marine science network in Europe. There's actually quite a lot. Even since I started in Marine Board maybe 8 years ago, there has been about 3 or 4 new networks that have been established. And some of them we're kind of jostling and doing the same thing, and it can be difficult. So we need to really work together in that area. This is a slide from the forthcoming Global Ocean Science Report. So IOC of UNESCO, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, is engaged in a very important activity, the development for the first time of an assessment of global science capacities at global level. And they've been doing this for a number of years, starting out with a survey which was sent out to countries all over the world. It's a very difficult thing to do. But some interesting stuff coming out. It hasn't been fully published yet. The executive summary was launched at the big ocean conference in New York a couple of weeks ago. But this is just a slide, and I'm grateful to Luis Valdez. He's the former head of ocean science at IOC. He's now back at IEO in Spain. But Luis is still working on this report. He's the leader of this report. And he's tracking the rapid growth over the course of the last century and into this century of intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. So you can just see, particularly in the 90s, this huge growth of IGOs and NGOs who support or have an interest in ocean science. There's quite a lot of them now. So this is the new ones coming on board during those decades. And this is a geographical representation. So you can see in Europe, we have a lot of new ones compared to other parts of the world. And Luis has also produced the periodic table of European marine and maritime elements. It's an interesting endeavor. I think he's planning to publish this in a peer-reviewed journal. But in any case, what he's tried to do is somehow put all of the different organizations that exist at European level, at international level, with different roles into a kind of periodic table design. So Marine Board, my own organization is here. He has it as our old name, MB of ESF, but we're now EMB, but that's us. That's JPI, various joint programming initiatives. Then down here, I can't read it from here, and probably you can't read the small writing very well, but the different colors respect to different categories. So European specialized agencies, that's the European Space Agencies, the JRC, Joint Research Council, the European Environment Agency, and so on. So this is just to show you some of the complexity there is in this landscape. And as I said at the outset, a lot of people don't even realize there's so many people working in this space, trying to sort of influence the science policy agenda. So I've created this slide a long time ago, and I call this center, it's a similar idea, the zone of influence. So looking at the European research area, the member states' research spend, the European Union research investments in Horizon 2020, for example, and marine and maritime policy also. And then you have all these different kinds of structures, national networks of institutes, thematic networks, Euromarine, infrastructure networks, the Eurofleets projects, and ERVO, European Research Vessel Operators, etc. Seas and Oceans Research, that's us, Marine Board, Fisheries and Aquaculture, EFAO, European Fisheries and Aquaculture Research Organizations, Operation Oceanography, Eurogoose, blah, blah, blah. So what I'm saying is, it's complicated. And everyone is trying to clamor for space, trying to get the policymakers to listen to them, trying to get their interests funded. So it's fun, let's put it that way. I've picked out some of the key ones that really do operate closely in the space that we're operating in. So in recent years, we've seen the development of Euromarine. I don't know how many people are familiar with Euromarine in this room. I suspect quite a few. So that's a merger of the three FP6 networks of excellence. And that's really now, so we're very pleased to see Euromarine developing. It has an important niche. But then, you know, my colleagues from Euromarine will say, we are a unique voice for marine science in Europe. And we'll go, no, but we've been saying we're that for years, so we can't both be saying that. We need to talk. So there's a little bit of this going on. The European Fisheries and Aquaculture Research Organizations, obviously that's focused on fisheries and aquaculture. Joint Programming Initiative on Healthy and Productive Seas and Oceans. So I'd say the first three are really scientific institutions forming these members. Okay. Then JPI Oceans is where member states come together at ministry level. And then you have industry platforms. This is not exhaustive by any means. It's just a few I've picked out. European Aquaculture Technology and Innovation Platform is for aquaculture, of course, waterborne technology for maritime shipping and so on. So, point being, it's a complex landscape. This slide is an old slide, so I'm sorry it's not up to date. I just want to make one point with this slide. I really must bring this one up to date. It stops around 2014. And it covers a 10-year period from 2004 to 2014. What we're really saying here is that marine science policy, or marine policy for science, really we have to take account of the much broader policy perspective across, for example, economic policy, research policy in general, and also marine and environmental, maritime and environmental policy. So we're not operating in isolation. And what we're doing is we're both influencing policies in those areas, and then we're being influenced by them. So over a period, you're getting, from economic policy, you're getting the Europe 2020 strategy, declarations by finance ministers, and the Limassol Declaration. The Blue Growth strategy appears here somewhere. Research policy leading to various sort of the European research. The ERA Green Paper, the Horizon 2020 proposals, etc., maritime policy. So we're conducting activities that feed in and are influenced by this. So again, it's just to give you a sort of a feel about the sort of feedback between those different policy areas. Okay, I think approaching the end of the presentation now, I just wanted to mention some of the international political drivers. So we've been speaking really about Europe so far, but Europe is operating, of course, in a much broader international environment and taking very strong, paying very strong attention to that in many cases. So a couple of things that are happening, most of you will be very aware of this. The UN 2030 agenda, which includes the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, of which SDG 14 is focused entirely on the oceans, which is a really positive development, although it's important also to note that the oceans are relevant across most of the other Sustainable Development Goals. So we need to be looking at influencing that agenda and making sure marine science is supporting the implementation of SDG 14 and the other SDGs. And, so just to mention that briefly, there's a lot of discussions going on, and we had the big conference in New York 2 weeks ago. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in April 2016, sorry for this typo, took a decision to produce a special report on climate change, the oceans, and the cryosphere. This is the first time the IPCC has supported a dedicated report on the oceans. Includes the cryosphere. It's really a big step forward, and again, that's in process now. They've been having the first meetings around that, so we'll have a first. So that's got tracking. I spoke with the students earlier about the activity around and leading up to the COP21 meeting in Paris, where the last Paris Climate Change Agreement was reached. It was a very good agreement, but we, along with many other organizations, were advocating for the role of the oceans in the climate change agreement. We had some success that the oceans appears twice in the agreement, the text, but really it's almost absent still. It's a serious issue. Initiatives like this, though, will help. The IPCC is taking notice and putting the oceans front and square on the agenda, and that will help it rise up the UN agenda for future climate change implementation of the Paris Agreement, let's say. The G7 process, of course, which Italy is an active participant and is, in fact, coordinating some of the activities around that. In particular, the Tsukuba communique looking at the importance of ocean observing from 2016, and the European Commission are very, very strong in terms of promoting a more, let's say, efficient international ocean governance framework. So we have a very complex international ocean governance framework. Even within the UN, there are multiple agencies taking a role in ocean governance. So we need to improve our ocean governance framework, and our commissioner, and the European Commissioner, Commissioner Vella, it's one of his flagship tasks. Also, just to mention the transatlantic collaboration, which is being launched by the Galway Statement in 2013, and that has really led to this transatlantic research, ocean research collaboration. I'm not going to say much about this, but it's really underpinned a sort of, let's say, it's been important in terms of the priority setting within the European Commission, and some of the funding and topics you're seeing in Horizon 2020 are coming back to this. When they agree to a big political initiative like this, you'll see that tracked in the research funding programs. Those are the 6 topics that are falling in under this. And then you've got a big event in Lisbon in July, a New Year of Blue Enlightenment, where they bring in the Southern Atlantic. So they're trying now to extend it, not just the North Atlantic, but into the South. There isn't time to go into EUs. I can discuss that another time. I'm going to finish with a mention on ocean literacy. Basically, I asked the students this morning how many were they aware of ocean literacy, and it's not something that they were very aware of at this stage. So we had a nice discussion about ocean literacy and what it means. And really, ocean literacy is a movement which started in the US. It has now really grown worldwide, including a very strong effort in Europe. And it's about engaging with the general public, helping people to understand how the ocean impacts on them and how they impact on the ocean. And there is a sort of structure with 7 ocean literacy principles. And now we have a lot of organizations really driving forward ocean literacy in around the world. But in Europe, we have a project called the Sea Change Project, which is funded by the Horizon 2020 program. And it's really looking at how we can reach out to the general public, because we had this discussion this morning, as I say, with the students. And very correctly, the guys were saying, look, you know, we have initiatives even here at Stazione Zoologica where we try to invite in members of the public, but we don't, in a huge city, we just get a small handful of people, and those are people who are already interested anyway. How do we reach out to other people? So that's what Sea Change is looking at, and that's what the ocean literacy community is looking at. In Marine Board, we've produced a number of products, fact sheets. This is usually looking at oceans and human health as a cross-cutting theme. We've produced animations and so on, but a lot of the other partners are really doing the going out and, you know, meeting people and doing the actual activities. There's a massive online open course which is just kicking off, and a whole range of products. So I just say go to seachangeproject.eu. That's the website where you'll get all the resources available. Okay, the future. What does the future hold? We don't know, but we can certainly try to look ahead and understand some of the challenges. Just to put something up there for fun, this is a North Sea wind power hub, which has an agreement has just been signed between 3 major utilities around the North Sea to develop an artificial island in the center of the North Sea, which will be a hub which will that vessels and equipment can be used to stationed to support enormous wind farms with up to 9,000 wind structures. Okay, that's in EU waters, but thousands of wind structures around this. This is what's on the cards. This is what's coming down. So we need to be ready to understand, how does marine science react to this? How does our science policy agenda feel about this? And what do we need to do about it? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? There's huge scientific questions, not just in terms of the rights or wrongs of it, but also in terms of, you know, the sustainability and then minimizing the impact of these kind of things. You know, wind power in particular has been identified by the OECD as a massive growth area. So it's almost zero, going from an almost zero basis in the last few years to 8% of the global ocean economy in 2030. So you can see that's a big area. Okay, just to sum up, I've really described to you the European Marine Board in general, the kind of work we do, and the fact that we're really operating in quite a crowded landscape, but we do add value, and these are some of our unique characteristics. Our mixed membership model, we are exclusively strategic. That's all we do. We provide advice and strategy. And we produce original publications. Most of the other networks don't publish things. We produce new science policy publications, and we have a rigorous process for that. We address the full spectrum of marine science. We have developed a strong reputation with decision makers, so that's important. Your reputation is everything. We actually have a sound funding base and operational model, which is very important to have a good 5-member secretariat supporting the board, funded by our members, and a very active membership. So those are some of the things that make Marine Board a success. And that's more or less the same message, so I'm actually going to skip that. I'd say all of the information you need, extra information, is on our website. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this insightful and interesting talk. Before I open the floor for questions, all these documents, I'm going to put them in the library reading room so that any of you want to have more details on it, then pick them from the boards on the wall and put them back when you are done. Please don't bring them home. Please don't bring them in your office, because they will go moldy. So please leave them for everybody else to read. Questions? Yes.
It seems in the map you showed at the beginning that all the institutions participating in the Marine Board are in countries that have a windows on the sea. But so what about the country on the mainland? How do they make their voice be heard? Because what happens in the ocean is something that we all should care. So not all the countries that are on sea.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and it's a good question. We don't have really many members from landlocked countries. We don't have really any members from landlocked countries. In the past, we have had a member from Austria, for example, and we have been in discussions with a number of those countries, Austria, Slovenia, about potentially joining the Marine Board. But by and large, it's very, let's say, most of those countries will have some level of marine research. It does exist there, of course, but it's usually at a lower level. And therefore, it's more difficult for them to, let's say, find funding and support to participate in European networks and to travel to meetings and so on. So it is a challenge, but you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of the issues we're dealing with are issues that are of global importance, and the oceans are of global importance. They are the life support system of the planet, and it's of interest to everyone, no matter where we are on the planet, to deal with these issues. But it is a harder sell, let's say, just traditionally, for getting countries that are landlocked or do not have a coastline to participate in this kind of science policy activity.
Thank you, Nav. Very interesting presentation. I was wondering, in terms of impact, you talked about impact before, and how successful do you think that the Marine Board has been in impacting in terms of H2020, FP7 H2020 programs?
Yeah.
Okay, so all of these various documents deal with very important issues, many of which have eventually led to projects that have been funded by the European Union. I'm thinking of marine biotechnology, for example, because that's the one I participated in and saw that really did lead to the call for a number of marine biotech projects. So I'm wondering, in terms of all of the various subject areas that you're dealing with, do you have an idea of how, if all of them become translated into projects, EU projects, or only a part, or?
Yeah, we started this impact monitoring process. I don't know if I mentioned that I think I mentioned it briefly. So it wasn't in place, for example, when for the marine biotech paper, it was sort of a couple of years after that when we started this more, let's say, systematic approach to trying to really answer the question you've just said. So what kind of impact has a particular paper had? And the results are mixed, I would say. So we can certainly say that the example I gave is a very good example, and a number of other papers have clearly, so this, it was too heavy to carry, but these two policy briefs are actually just summaries of much larger position papers. So there are full position papers on both of those topics. I would say this was very successful. So this is Submerged Cultural Heritage. The position paper has a different title, in fact, but it's about really promoting the interaction between humanities and geosciences in the study and safeguarding of our submerged cultural heritage, prehistoric archaeological sites that are in the shallow seas around Europe's coast that were covered after sea level rise following the melting of the sea ice after the last glacial maximum. So we have all these sites that people don't even know exist. I mean, this is, I've forgotten the name of it just briefly. What's the name of the site there in Pavlopetri? This is Pavlopetri in Greece. And you know, it's a beautiful example of an underwater site where divers can go down and look at that. Anyway, back to your question. This resulted in very clear topics appearing in the Horizon 2020 work program in two different areas, actually, in two different societal challenge areas. We had topics on submerged cultural heritage, and we also saw that the marine cultural submerged culture, so cultural heritage was quite high on the agenda in Europe, but we got the marine component brought into a number of policy documents at European Union level. So we tracked this all through and produced a report on all of these impacts. So we had very clear, black and white, successful impacts from that paper, whereas this one, it's much harder to see where we've been impactful, to be honest. It's still not, you know, there's still some time, it's relatively recent, but we would have liked to have seen a stronger response to this, and it just hasn't emerged. And we can't control that. We can do our best, we can produce the paper, we can communicate it actively, and we've done everything we can with this. But, you know, sometimes we get a hit and sometimes we don't, and we didn't really get a hit with this one. The other thing I'd say is sometimes with the Oceans and Human Health, with this, you can see that there's almost exclusively a Marine Board impact. So it's our work exclusively. Other times we're working with others. It's our voice is part of a voice. So oceans and climate, the IPCC report, things like that. We're certainly not the only ones advocating there. We're advocating with multiple others. But we'd say we're part of a unison of voices that in some topics that do have an impact. So we can sometimes, so it's harder to tease out sometimes when something is completely down to our work and something is more, you know, just a general trend that we've been part of.
Marina.
I was very much surprised to see the graph in which you show the extremely high number of international organizations in Europe as compared to other, I guess, continent. I
Yes.
don't remember. And do you think that this is the result of how Europe is structured? And do you think that this is something positive in terms of you know, the way in which this the way in which the energy
Yeah.
is spent to get results, funding good science? Do you think is something positive, or maybe a streamlined
Yeah.
structure would be more effective?
Yeah. There's no doubt that, well, first of all, if you look at ocean issues and ocean science and the, let's say, issues around degradation of ocean environments and climate change, etc. You know, we can track back to 30, 40 years ago. Before that, really, people were largely completely unaware. I'm not talking about the general public, but almost exclusively the ocean was seen as a commons where there was almost endless resources that we could exploit. It's only in the last 50 years or so that we started to realize that this, of course, is not the case, and we're doing serious damage through our activities, and we're taking we're affecting fish populations, and the oceans are changing, et cetera, et cetera. So you start to get this sort of response in terms of the formation foundation of NGOs and IGOs. So the political response is the IGOs, and the sort of societal response is the NGOs. But you're right that it may not be the best thing to have this, sudden surge in numbers of these different organizations. I actually don't know the answer to the question whether that's good or bad. I couldn't answer it, but I would argue certainly the same. For example, in the point I was making about too many voices in our area, in the science policy domain at European level, I find that rather frustrating at times, if I'm perfectly honest. Because you end up competing, and I don't want to compete with other fellow marine scientists trying to sort of promote marine science, and we talk to each other, of course, but it's really not a good development. And I imagine the same would apply for some of these NGOs. The Commission, for example, the European Commission, always, they want to simplify the landscape. They want to talk to one or two actors. They don't want to talk to this multiple voices. So they always say, organize yourselves through a channel that we can talk to. And we try and do that. And I find it frustrating, let me say in particular, because the Commission asked the heads of marine science institutes in the mid-90s to organize themselves, form some kind of network that we can have a one-stop shop. We can talk to you guys about what we need to be putting in the programs. We did it. Marine Board was founded, and we built Marine Board over the years. Then the Commission says, okay, we need Euromarine. And they funds lots of projects to establish Euromarine, and then Euromarine is established. Okay, I understand the guys in Euromarine want to develop that, and that's fair enough, and we've no exclusive right to this space. But the Commission's not helping by complicating the environment. The Commission established the JPI Oceans as well. They don't own the JPIs. The JPIs are member states, but it was the Commission that drove through the process to establish. So, you get the Commission itself is actually complicating the landscape and then saying we need a simple channel to speak to. So I'm sorry, I got off on a little bit of a digression there, but I hope I answered your question.
On the other hand, I spoke with Americans about this process of trying to unify everything, and they say unification leads to stagnation and leads to lack of competition.
Sure.
And then when you have just one organization speak with all,
that's possibly true.
Dusty.
Yeah.
So keeps on the finger.
Hi. So you say that Stazione Zoologica is not part of the Euromarine Board, so the Marine Board. I found this very disappointing because since it can influence the calls, it's a sort of scientific suicide from my point of view. So do you think it's possible, as you started to say, that the Stazione can be part of the members because the number can increase in terms of number for each country, or because there is a sort of donation between the members from each country?
So at our last executive committee meeting, this topic came back on the agenda, and we decided to revisit this limit of 3 members per country because we felt this is the Italian situation is a perfect example where everyone on Marine Board agrees, in our executive committee, that an organization like Stazione Zoologica would be a great member, and we'd love to have Stazione Zoologica as a member. But we have our 3 members now, and there was a situation where we had to choose between 2 Italian members, and Stazione didn't become the member, and that was very difficult and very frustrating. So we will be looking at this issue again. I cannot predict how that discussion will finish, but clearly if it's back on the agenda, it's there for a reason, and it's very possible that we will have some relaxation in this limit to ensure that we're getting all the institutions who want to be members, and then we'll have to look at some other mechanisms to ensure that there's this kind of fairness in terms of the voices at the table. So I think that we can achieve that in other ways, but rather than restricting and keeping people out. So that's the feeling we have now within our executive committee. So as I said, I can't say for sure, but I would be very hopeful that within a year or so we might see that changing. And I would imagine that as soon as that happens, we'll be back in touch with Stazione Zoologica and inviting you to join.
I thank everybody for having been present and participating here, and thank you very much for
you very
your...
much.
And now it's lunchtime. Thank you.